welcome to another episode of Hobby Tips and Tricks, the series where I let you in on all my little secrets when it comes to basing and painting. Now today I'm going to be talking about crackle paint. Some of you might know what that is and some of you might not, but a little while ago I watched a video on the channel Luke's APS, which is a fantastic channel by the way, and I suggest that you subscribe to it because it's brilliant. And he did some experimenting with crackle paints where he did different depths when he was putting them on, and he added ink to some of them and things like that just to see what the results were. And it got me thinking that I have several crackle paints, and when I see something that I want to make and I see that there's, you know, they've used crackle paint on it but it was a yellow crackle paint, I'll think, oh, I need to go and buy yellow crackle paint. Or I might, you know, I like the crackle effect that it gives, but I want something more. So I decided to do some of my own experimenting. And I'm going to show you the results of that in this video. But before I show you that, I am going to do a very quick tutorial just on how to use crackle paint and what it is, because some of you might never have seen it before, or you might have, but you're not too sure how to use it. So for the first few minutes, I'll show you what it is, and then I'll bring out all the experimentation I've done and show you what you can really do with crackle paint. So for those of you who don't know, crackle paint is like a paste, a very thick paint that you apply in a very thick layer, and as it dries, it forms cracks. And in between those cracks, you can see the colour of the layer underneath. So for example, on this model that I've painted, you can see, if I can get it close up, there, that's the kind of typical lava effect that you'll see crackle paint used for, really. So when I applied this, I covered the base in my lava-y colours and let them dry. Then I applied some PVA glue, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then I put the paste on quite thickly, and then I came down the next morning and voila, this lovely cracked lava effect had appeared, as if by magic. So there are several steps to applying this paint. So the first thing you're going to need is a primed base. Now this base that I'm using here, I've got a stack of these. These aren't actually bases. We bought the Citadel paint storage thing that's made out of wood. I can't remember who makes it. And you have to punch all of these out for every slot in the paint holder. So I've got a good 200 of these, and I suddenly realised a couple of weeks ago these would make great practice bases. So that's what I've done. So this has been primed white, and I'd always recommend priming any base before you do anything that involves applying actual paint to it. So this has been primed, and I am now going to apply the colour that I would like to show through my crackle paint. And I'm choosing a nice blue colour, and I'm not going to try and pronounce that, so I will show it to you. Ariman blue? I don't know, maybe somebody knows. So I'm going to get some of that on my paintbrush, and I'm just going to give this a paint all over. So once my crackle paint has been applied and it's dried, this is the colour that's going to show through. Now I'm just doing this as a really simple one just to demonstrate of just a single colour, but as this is wet, you could add a few more colours into it and wet blend it. You could leave that to dry and add a few dots or something else, whatever you want. So I'm going to leave this one to dry very quickly, and then I'll come back with the next step. So that paint's nicely dried now. So the next and probably the most important step in this is to take some PVA glue and put a blob in the middle. And then you're just going to use a paintbrush and spread it around so you've got a nice even coating. And you can be very liberal with this. In fact, I would recommend it. Put on as much as it will physically hold. And I'm putting especially a lot on this because obviously this is a wooden base, and even though I've primed it and painted it, it's still slightly absorbent. Now, the reason you have to apply the PVA glue before the Crackle paint is because when the Crackle paint dries and starts to form those cracks, it kind of pulls upwards slightly. And if you didn't have this layer of PVA glue, it would actually pull the paint up with it and either expose the primer layer that you did or the naked base itself underneath, and it doesn't look very good when that happens. So my biggest tip when using Crackle paint is to always prime, always use PVA glue, and always go overboard on PVA glue, just to make sure that you get the right effect. So I'm going to leave that to dry, and once that's completely dry, I'll come back and I'll show you how the Crackle paint itself works. Now that the glue's completely dry, we can apply our Crackle paint. Now, as I said earlier, there are lots of different colours and kinds of Crackle paint. So, for example, from the Citadel range, this is Mordant Earth, and this is completely black. So this is the one that people tend to use for the lava effect I showed you. Then they do Agrellan Earth and Agrellan Badlands. Now, Agrellan Earth is like the Modern Earth in that it's a very smooth paste, and it's kind of a browny, earthy colour. And then Agrellan Badland is still a Crackle paint, but it's kind of gritty. I don't know if you can see that there. It's got the texture in it, so it doesn't crack quite as much, but it gives a more textured effect. And then they do the Sterling Battlemire as well, which is a darker browny colour, and that's more for doing things like mud and things like that. But for this example, I am going to use this that I found online, and this is plain white Crackle paint. So you open it up, and like I said, it's like a very thick, goopy paint. So to apply this, I'm going to use my little texture applicator tool. I'm going to take it out and just splat it on there. So as you can see, I'm not spreading this out so that it's really thin. I'm leaving quite a bit of depth to it. Now, from what I've read and seen, the optimal depth for most Crackle paints is about 1.5 millimeters. Now, I'm not expecting anybody to actually try and accurately measure that. But what I will do is I will show you from the side roughly how thickly I am applying this. So you can see there, it's not like it would be if I was just painting it white. There's a definite kind of thickness to this as I'm applying it. Just try and push it all the way around to the edges. And you don't have to be too neat with this. It doesn't have to be completely flat and smooth. It will settle slightly anyway, but once it starts cracking, you can't really tell how flat or smoothly you applied the paint in the first place. So there we go. Now, you don't have to use a special tool for this. You can use a paintbrush, but I would recommend using a very old one, just so you're not ruining a good brush. So now I'm going to leave this, and this is the frustrating part with Crackle paints, is you've got to have patience for it. I'm going to leave this for a full 24 hours before I come back to it. because I want the paint to fully dry and get a chance to fully form all those cracks. So I will see you tomorrow. It's now 48 hours later because I didn't get a chance to come back and have a look yesterday. And as you can see, this is how it's cracked. Now, I was quite surprised by this because I've never really seen a Crackle paint that has cracked in this way. It's got some really huge cracks in it, and then these really big bits of solid paint that are left. Now, honestly, I'm not sure if I like that effect or not, but it's, you know, I know what it looks like now and I can use that as an option. So while that was drying, I did some experimenting with this Crackle paint, and I wanted to see how it worked if you added different things to it. So the first one I did was this one. And with this one, I added two drops of P3 turquoise ink. And as you can see, obviously it's coloured the paint. But not only that, if you compare this side by side, we've got much smaller cracks in this and much smaller solid areas of paint. Now, to me, that looks better for doing an effect like cracked ice or something like that. So that was with 2 drops of ink. Then what I did was I decided to try it with paint. Now, from what I had heard, if you add paint, normal acrylic paint like Citadel paints, to Crackle paint, it didn't work very well. However, ta-da! So I added quite a lot of Citadel's Wild Rider Red to this one. That's really hard to say. Wild Rider Red. Yeah, I added quite a lot. I'm talking 4 or 5 drops to this. And obviously, because the paint's white and what I've added is red, it's come out as a pinky colour. But I really like this crack pattern. I wasn't expecting it to crack at all. But as you can see, it's done a really nice job. It's almost a bit like the Modern Earth, the black one from Citadel. So, yeah, I really like that. I'm going to be adding paint to this quite a bit, I think, in the future. So, another thing I tried, and this one I was almost certain wouldn't work, but it's not too bad, actually, is I added glitter. Now, this is some really, really extra fine glitter. It's the kind of stuff you really don't want to spill on your carpet. So I added a couple of pinches to this one. And I think you can probably just about see the sparkles there, but they're not over the top. But the really interesting thing about this is that it's made it a very textured surface. So that would be really good for dry brushing. And it does still have some cracks in it, but they're very subtle. Now, I can kind of see that being used as a snow texture in almost like a fairy tale world. So you've got the really bright glittery snow. So yeah, I quite like that one, and I might experiment with adding other coarser textures to it, like sand and things like that, just to see how it comes out. And then the last thing I tried with this white was to add some pigment. Now, this is just a 25mm slotted base, and I just painted around. And again, I think this has worked really well. I think if I had some pale brown pigment, I could almost make my own Agrellan Earth for the Citadel one. So it's added quite a subtle. I used some dark green pigment, and I used just a tiny, tiny touch. And it's made a really nice creamy greeny colour, and again it's still cracked really, really well. So yeah, I'm quite impressed with that. So that's all of the kind of experiments I did with the white Crackle paint that I bought. But I just wanted to show you as well, in case you're not familiar, what the Citadel ones do. Now, this is a little test I did with some of the Citadel Black Mordant Earth. I just put this on in the recommended thickness. Now, as you can see, if you compare this to some of the white, this has lots and lots of cracks in it, but they're very wide cracks, even though there's lots of them. So there's lots of little bits of surface left. The cracks are much wider, so you can see a lot more colour in between the cracks. So there's definitely different applications for the different types of Crackle paint there, I think, because this is a really nice effect. The only thing I have found with the Mordant Earth is that sometimes the little patches that are little patches of surface that are still there can come off if you touch them too hard. So if you decide to dry brush this or something, just be very, very careful when you do. So this one is another one I did using Citadel. But what I want to do is see how it worked if you kind of used both of their Agrellan paints in the same base. So I did half of it here in Agrellan Earth, which you can see very similar to the Mordant Earth in the way it cracks and the big gaps it leaves. And then this is the Agrellan Badlands. So this is the gritty textured one. And it gives quite a good finish because you've got this gritty texture, a bit like with this one. But the cracks are just a tiny bit more pronounced. And then what I've also done with this one is I've stuck a couple of tufts on it. But once I'd painted it, before it started to dry, I actually embedded this skull into it and used the paint as the glue rather than gluing the skull on afterwards. And I don't know how well you can see it, but it looks just a lot more natural. It looks like this skull's been there through a flood and then the land has dried again, and you can see the kind of the dried earth and dirt, if you like, just stuck to the skull. So you can use this as almost like basing cement. You can put it on and then press things into it, much like I showed you a couple of videos ago with the Vallejo pumice texture. So that's another thing you can do there. And then I just did this little one here, again, using the Agrellan Badlands. Pressed my little skull there into it and put a tuft on. Obviously, I haven't painted the rim on this one. And then I've just put a wash over it as well. So you can see there, this one I dry brush slightly with Zandri dust, and this one I just put a wash on. So you can see, even with using the same Citadel paint, you can get very different results depending on what you do afterwards. And then the final little experiment, this is just something I'm just messing with now, is I've created a base here just using normal Vallejo gritted pumice around here. But what I've done is before I put the pumice on, I put a couple of tiny little blobs and layers of the white paint, quite thin ones, and let them crack. And then I put all of this round. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to build this up into kind of a snowy, icy wasteland. So I'm just experimenting here to see how it works when you incorporate just little bits of the Crackle paint into the terrain of a base. So hopefully I'll have this finished soon, and then I'll be able to show it on my Facebook page, and if it works and it comes out as a good base, I'll do a tutorial for it. One thing I just want to say, I just want to correct myself. In an earlier segment of the video, I mentioned that Citadel Sterling Battlemire was a Crackle paint, and then I realised it's not. Sterling Battlemire is just a texture paint. It doesn't crack, it doesn't crackle. If you want an earthy coloured Crackle paint with some texture from Citadel, it's the Agrellan Badlands you'll be looking for, and that's this one and this one here. So there you go. I've tried as many possible combinations using this Crackle paint as I can. And my verdict is that if you wanted to be able to create loads of different effects from Crackle paint, I would suggest that all you really need in your collection is some white and some black, because you're never going to be able to make black from the white stuff, because no matter how much black you add, it will always be grey. Even if you add black ink, I think you're never going to get a solid black. So if you want black Crackle paint, buy black Crackle paint. If you want other colours of Crackle paint, buy some white. Buy some white, and then you can do what I've done here and just do some tests, add in paints, inks, pigments, textures, and it will work out so much cheaper for you. Because I think this pot of the white Crackle paint was about £6, I think, from eBay, maybe a pound or two more when you add postage. And there's a lot in here. I mean, I've done all of these bases from it and I've barely touched it. If you wanted all these different colours of Crackle paint, you'd be paying £5-6 a pop per colour, and you're not going to go through all of that in a lifetime. So I would recommend buying a black, be it a cheap black or the Modern Earth from Citadel, and then just buying a big pot of white like I've done, and then you can do all of these different things with it yourself. So there you go. Those are the things that I've discovered so far, but I'm still going to keep experimenting, and that's one of the things I love about this hobby, is that you don't have to stick to what everyone else does or what you've seen before. You can put a few drops of paint in here and mix it with that and try this out, and you're not really losing much if it doesn't come out as you want it. So I'm all for the experimentation. So I hope this has inspired you to either try out some of my methods or go out and try some of yours. And if it has, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the little bell icon, because then you'll get notified of every time I release new content. And if you do enjoy my content, why not follow me on Facebook? You can find me at Debsworth Hobby Studio, and you will get to see some inside stories on there. You'll get to see what I'm up to and what I'm developing. So I will see you next time, and until then, happy hobbying.